Picture this. It's early 1997.
Okay.
You are an executive at EMI or Parlophone Records, and you're sitting in this sleek, intimidating boardroom, right? You are waiting to hear the highly anticipated follow-up to Radiohead's massive hit album, The Bends.
Oh man, the pressure there would be insane.
Insane. And understandably, considering the musical landscape of the time, you are expecting a radio-friendly, melodic, alternative rock anthem. Like, you want something you can easily package, sell, and just slap onto heavy rotation on every radio station in the world.
Right, something catchy.
Exactly. But instead, the band walks in and hands you the master tape for a track called Paranoid Android. You press play, and you're hit with this 6.5-minute, multi-part, non-linear rock single that features absolutely zero repeating choruses.
None. Zero.
You listen in sheer horror. The skepticism in the room is just palpable, and you confidently predict to the band that this track is going to hit a massive, uncommercial wall.
Which, honestly, is a completely logical assumption for an executive to make. I mean, that track violently defied all music industry logic of the late 90s. But here's the wild part.
Yeah.
Despite the label executives absolutely panicking, this bizarre, unedited track didn't just survive. It completely thrived. It debuted at number 3 on the UK singles chart in May 1997.
Wow, number 3.
Yeah, and it secured heavy daytime rotation on BBC Radio 1, which was such an unpredictable, bizarre turn of events that the frontman, Tom York, actually thought the BBC placing it in heavy rotation had to be a practical joke, or like some kind of dare.
Welcome to Deep Cuts and Deep Thinking. We're taking a deep dive into the source material for you today, unpacking the mechanics, the meaning, and the legacy of this fragmented masterpiece. Because honestly, looking at the industry's initial reaction, their panic makes total sense. It's like a director pitching a 6-hour surrealist art house film to a major movie studio that's desperately looking for a tight 90-minute summer blockbuster. And somehow, against all odds, the bizarre art house film accidentally becomes the blockbuster anyway.
That is the perfect analogy for what happened here. I mean, to understand how a song this openly hostile and, complex conquered mainstream daytime radio, we really have to look at the foundational architecture of how it was built.
Right.
Interestingly enough, the creation of this massive suite actually started with the band utterly failing to achieve a much simpler goal, which was just writing a conventional 3-minute pop song.
Okay, I want to dig into that failure, because looking at the research, they didn't just sit down in a studio and write a 6-minute epic from start to finish in one go, right? Like, they were actually sitting on a bunch of disjointed pieces.
Exactly. Yeah, when the band was rehearsing in early 1996, they were completely stuck. They had these 3 totally distinct, incomplete song fragments. They were written in entirely different tempos, different keys, completely different emotional registers.
Like, completely unrelated to each other.
Right. One was a moody acoustic piece, one was a heavy rock riff, and one was this sweeping choral arrangement. They couldn't wrangle any single one of them into a normal verse-chorus structure. So rather than throwing them away, they decided to look backward into music history for a solution. They borrowed a structural blueprint from the Beatles' 1968 classic, Happiness is a Warm Gun.
Oh, right. So they basically used John Lennon's composite cut-and-paste writing technique, just forcing the disparate pieces together.
Yes, exactly.
But looking at the source material, the genesis of this track as a live performance is just sprawling. Like, the incredibly tight, razor-sharp Studio Master edit that we all know today is not how this song started its life out in the wild.
No, not at all.
In early 1996, they were actually road testing this song while touring with Alanis Morissette. And these early live iterations spanned over 12, sometimes 14 minutes long.
14 minutes, just imagine that.
Yeah. And crucially, they didn't have that blistering, effects-heavy second lead guitar solo that we know today. Instead, they featured this massive, extended, improvisational Hammond organ solo by Johnny Greenwood.
Right. I want you to just put yourself in that scenario. You are in a massive stadium audience. You're waiting to hear a snappy, straightforward pop rock hit like Ironic, and you are suddenly hit with a 14-minute progressive rock jam about social alienation featuring a giant winding organ solo.
That sounds exhausting.
It was. It was loose, it was incredibly psychedelic, and it was deliberately confrontational to the audience. It was really the band testing their own boundaries.
But okay, taking a 14-minute live jam and turning it into a recorded track brings up a massive logistical question for me. I mean, think about how easily you can edit a video or an audio clip on your phone today. You just swipe, pinch, cut, whatever.
Right, it takes 2 seconds.
But in 1996, before digital grids were the industry standard, before you could just drag and drop audio files on a computer screen, how do you flawlessly stitch together an acoustic ballad, a heavy rock riff, and a classical choral lament without it sounding like an absolute train wreck?
You are touching on what is genuinely one of the greatest engineering feats of the 1990s. The answer to that question is their producer, Nigel Godrich, and his absolute mastery of physical tape editing.
Physical tape.
Physical tape. We are not talking about highlighting a track and hitting copy and paste on a keyboard. Godrich had to physically, manually slice and splice 2-inch 24-track analog magnetic tape with a literal razor blade.
Wait, so he's literally cutting the physical recording ribbon to force these different parts together?
Yes. He had to physically force these wildly different tempo shifts to bind together. When you record to tape, the speed of the tape passing over the recording head determines the timing of the song to attach a slow acoustic part to a fast, aggressive rock part. Godrich had to locate the exact milliliter on the tape where the beat ended, mark it with a grease pencil, cut it at a precise angle with a razor, and tape it to the next section.
That is terrifying.
Oh, it's incredibly stressful. If you cut the tape at the wrong fraction of a millisecond, he could chop a drum transient in half and completely ruin the master take. It was a high-wire act of analog engineering to make an acoustic guitar seamlessly crash into a distorted bass line and a heavy rock drum beat.
That's just wild. But having a bizarre Frankenstein structure on paper is one thing. To actually make it feel cohesive, they needed a very specific atmosphere. The actual paranoid tension of the track, the muscle and the blood of it seems to have been born from the physical spaces where they recorded it, because they didn't just walk into a sterile corporate recording studio to lay this down.
No, not at all. They completely rejected standard commercial studio environments. Those spaces felt too dead, too, acoustically controlled for what they were trying to capture, so they relocated to St. Catherine's Court.
Right, I read about this.
Yeah, it's this massive 15th century Tudor manor house in Somerset, England, that was actually owned at the time by the actress Jane Seymour.
Why a 15th century manor house, though? I mean, what does that give you musically that a multi-million-dollar studio doesn't?
Well, it gives you natural space. Instead of using artificial digital effects to create an echo or a sense of roominess, they used the building's architecture as an active instrument.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they set up microphones in the stone stairwells in the grand ballrooms to capture the natural ecclesiastical reverberation of the house. When you hear the acoustic guitars or the lead vocals on the track, you're hearing the actual sound waves physically bouncing off 500-year-old uneven stone.
That's amazing.
It is. It creates a completely different acoustic signature than a foam-padded vocal booth.
Which gives it this incredibly haunted domestic dread feeling. It sounds isolated, and that isolation bleeds perfectly into the lyrics, which is where this song really gets its teeth, I think. I want to talk about the aggressive center section, the Gucci little Piggy lyrics.
Oh, yeah, that part is intense.
Because reading through the sources, this wasn't some abstract sci-fi concept about robots, even with the Douglas Adams reference in the title. This was triggered by a real, highly traumatizing encounter, right?
Yes, the lyrical catalyst was entirely grounded in reality. Tom York was at an upscale VIP bar in Los Angeles, surrounded by people doing heavy amounts of cocaine, and he watched a woman in a vacuum-packed designer dress erupt into an unhinged violent rage simply because a drink was accidentally spilled on her.
So the reaction was just entirely disproportionate to the event.
Completely. He later wrote about how he looked at her face during this meltdown and saw something completely devoid of humanity. He described her as looking possessed and noted that her voice sounded like a fax machine.
A fax machine?
Yeah, just this mechanical, relentless grating noise. The incident crystallized this intense revulsion he had toward commercial superficiality and aggression. The song essentially became a mirror, reflecting the predatory, hollow nature of consumer culture back at itself.
And this right here is exactly why I have to push back on a persistent comparison I always see. People always call this track the Bohemian Rhapsody of the 90s.
Oh, I hear that all the time.
Right. It's an easy shorthand for critics because both songs are long and feature distinct operatic sections. But isn't that totally missing the point? I mean, Queen's song feels like a highly choreographed theatrical stage play. It's melodramatic and it's kind of winking at you.
Yeah.
Radiohead song feels like you're trapped in a claustrophobic elevator with a malfunctioning alarm. It's not theatrical, it is a literal panic attack.
You are absolutely hitting the nail on the head. And interestingly enough, the band felt the exact same way.
Really?
Yeah. Johnny Greenwood himself explicitly rejected the Queen comparison for that precise reason. He stated that Paranoid Android is far too tense to be compared to Bohemian Rhapsody. Queen provides a sense of grand, melodramatic release. Radiohead, on the other hand, provides metric dissonance.
Let's pause on that term for a second. Metric dissonance, because that is a huge part of why the song makes you feel physically uncomfortable as a listener. Can you explain the mechanics of how they actually achieve that feeling?
I'd be happy to. So during that heavy, aggressive middle section, the part inspired by the LA bar incident, the band isn't playing in standard 4/4 rock time.
Right, which is what we're used to hearing on the radio.
Exactly. In standard 4/4 time, you count 1, 2, 3, 4, and your brain finds comfort in that predictable, even symmetry. Instead, they are using jarring, asymmetrical 7/8 timing.
So they're actively dropping a beat.
Precisely. Imagine you are walking down a staircase in the dark. Your brain calculates the rhythm of your steps, and you confidently put your foot down expecting that final step, but there isn't one.
Oh, I hate that feeling.
Right. Your foot just drops into empty air and your stomach lurches. That is exactly what 7/8 time does to your auditory processing. It drops that final eighth note, so the rhythm constantly lurches forward before you are fully ready for it. It creates literal physical unease.
And the instrumentation just amplifies that stumbling feeling. Like the lead guitar doesn't sound heroic or triumphant. It sounds completely broken.
Yes, and that is very intentional. Johnny Greenwood is running his guitar through aggressive distortion and a specific piece of analog studio gear called a Mutronics mutator.
A Mutronics mutator?
Yeah, it's a type of synthesizer filter that strips away all the warm, familiar blues rock cliches you'd expect in a guitar solo. It replaces them with this stuttering, frequency-sweeping noise that mimics mechanical distress.
And underneath that, you have Colin Greenwood's bass line, which isn't exactly a comforting foundation either.
Right, the bass line is driving this chromatic, sinister groove.
Chromatic meaning what, exactly?
Right. So a chromatic scale means you are playing notes that are directly adjacent to each other on the fretboard, rather than skipping around a harmonious scale. It creates a sound that never feels resolved. It sounds like a swarm of insects creeping closer. So you have this creeping bass line, while the lead guitar sounds like a machine tearing itself apart. It perfectly translates the social alienation York was feeling in that Los Angeles bar into an auditory experience.
Wow. So if we step back, you have this audio master that is completely defying pop conventions.
Yeah.
It is 6.5 minutes long. It is structurally disjointed through razor blade take splicing. It is recorded in a reverberating Tudor mansion, and it's full of metric dissonance.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. Now, the label comes back and says, great, we need a music video to play on MTV. How on earth do you visualize a song this complex without reducing it to literal, cheesy sci-fi tropes? I mean, if you put a literal android carrying a Gucci bag on screen, you completely ruin the subtext of the song.
The band was incredibly aware of that danger. They wanted a visual accompaniment that matched the psychological disorientation of the audio, but they wanted to completely bypass standard live-action music video directors. They definitely didn't want to be in the video performing the song on some moody soundstage.
Typical rock star stuff.
Exactly. So they commissioned a Swedish animator named Magnus Carlsson.
And this is where the visual subversion gets brilliant. According to the source material, the band purposely gave Carlsson an unlabeled, strictly instrumental version of the track. They gave him absolutely zero lyrics to work with.
Which is such a fascinating creative constraint. They did it specifically to avoid him drawing literal visual cues. They didn't want him to hear the lyrics and just draw an alien or a pig or a woman in a designer dress. They essentially locked him in a room with nothing but the raw emotional dynamics of the music.
And left entirely to his own devices, Carlsson created this deadpan, surreal, urban underworld. It's centered around these two animated characters, Robin and Benjamin, who wander through the city encountering the most bizarre, grotesque things.
Oh, it's so weird.
There are mermaids, an angelic helicopter, a strange pub, and most notoriously, a leather-clad, self-mutilating businessman.
It was a deeply European, absurd piece of animation that fit the metric dissonance of the song perfectly. But of course, when you submit a video that weird to American television networks in 1997, you run into broadcast standards.
Which brings us to one of the most absurd, darkly ironic moments in the entire history of this track. The double standard censorship of MTV in the United States.
It is truly staggering when you look at the mechanics of what the network decided to do. So the video hits heavy rotation, but MPD US broadcast standards step in to sanitize it. They look at Carlsson's animation, and they force him to digitally draw a bikini top over the animated mermaid's bare breasts.
A bikini top?
Yes. They mandate that cartoon anatomy is entirely unacceptable for the American viewing public.
But, and here is where the story gets incredibly layered, the network left other parts of the video completely alone. MTV allowed a sequence of the animated businessman happily hacking his own limbs off with an axe to air completely uncut.
Correct. Graphic, horrific self-mutilation by a man in a leather mask. Perfectly fine for daytime television. An animated mermaid's anatomy. That must be censored immediately to protect the youth.
Looking at the sources, the band saw this censorship as a profound irony. To them, it proved the exact point of the song.
Oh, yeah.
The material notes that they viewed it as a reflection of a society with completely broken priorities. Like, where an animated mermaid is flagged as a societal threat, but a sequence of graphic, senseless self-dismemberment is cleared for daytime consumer entertainment. They felt you couldn't have written a better punchline to Tom York's thesis about the moral vacuity of modern culture if you tried.
It validated the entire underlying anxiety of that era of the band's career. It showed exactly how mediated, hypocritical, and absurd the cultural landscape had become. The network's reaction was essentially a real-world extension of the Gucci Little Piggy incident at the VIP bar.
So, we've walked through the tape splicing, the Tudor mansions, the metric dissonance, and the animated mermaids. What does this all mean for you, listening to this today?
Well, that exact blend of uncompromising artistic vision and sharp cultural critique is why this deep dive is so vital to understand. This wasn't just a hit song for Radiohead. It was a massive turning point for music as a whole. It was the death knell for the verse-chorus nostalgia of the Britpop era.
We have to remember what was happening in the UK at that time. Britpop bands like Oasis and Blur were dominating the charts with highly nostalgic traditional guitar pop that looked backward to the 1960s.
Right.
Radiohead completely rejected that. By unifying acoustic folk, intricate classical choral counterpoint, and abrasive, filter-heavy noise rock into a single 24-track tape collage, they proved that you didn't have to talk down to your audience to achieve massive commercial success.
You could challenge them. You could make them actively uncomfortable. And in doing so, they shifted the global alternative rock paradigm. They directly paved the way for the cinematic, structurally experimental rock of bands like Muse and Coldplay that followed in the early 2000s. They expanded the imaginable scale of what a mainstream rock single could be, proving that a song didn't need a repeating chorus to keep millions of people listening.
They took that 6-hour art house film and made everyone line up to buy a ticket to the Blockbuster. It's genuinely incredible. But I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about your day. Throughout the track, buried deep in the mix during that opening acoustic section, there's an early Apple Mac Fred speech synthesizer quietly reciting the phrase, "I may be paranoid, but not an android." Back in 1997, using a robotic, computerized voice was a clever metaphor. It was a symbol for losing our humanity to consumerism and the creeping digital age. But think about your life today. You interact with algorithmic AI voices every single day. They recommend your music, they schedule your meetings, they write your emails, and they mimic human empathy with terrifying accuracy. The unborn chicken voices that Tom York sang about being in his head are no longer just internal, abstract anxieties. We have literally programmed them into the phones we carry in our pockets. So nearly 30 years after those record executives panicked in that boardroom, you have to ask yourself, are we the ones listening to the androids, or have we finally become them? If you like this episode, please like and subscribe.
Thanks for diving in with us.